Hi, and welcome to today's webinar on job development. We've got a few housekeeping things to go through, of course, but the usual sort of thing, microphones and cameras, if you could be muted and turned off, and that'll allow us a bit more bandwidth. So let's go. So firstly, a little bit about today's presentation, the outline of topics. As you can see, we'll look at some background and information on myself and the centre. So the evidence for job development. We'll look at the two-layered process, which is what job development is. A job development framework. Look at, within that context, job development practice. Look at improving the evidence, and then we'll have a discussion about why this is really important. So, a little bit about myself. Well, I'm Dr. Peter Smith. I'm the Director-Founder for the Centre for Disability Employment Research and Practice. As you can see, I'm Visiting Fellow at the Young Tan Institute on Employment and Disability, the ILR School at Cornell University in New York, and a Fellow of the School of Social and Political Sciences at the University of Melbourne. All of those things, I guess, were important a few years ago when we could travel. I actually only came back to Australia from Cornell just before COVID, so I timed that well. But that's the world we find ourselves in. What I will say to you is that despite all that, I'm not an academic. I'm someone who started as a support worker and simply came to qualifications by virtue of having a question I needed to answer, and I couldn't find the answer to it. So, you start searching for answers, and all of a sudden you accumulate a whole bunch of qualifications. So that's kind of my story, I guess, to a degree, which is important. The centre itself. The centre itself came about because I was studying at the University of Sydney under my mentor, Trevor Parmenter, and I was bemoaning the fact that with the advent of the NDIS, there wasn't really a focus on research around practice and the evidence for disability employment in Australia. This is despite the fact that Trevor had been involved for decades. That was really the case. There was no real emphasis on disability employment practice. So at that time, I'd been travelling backwards and forwards and to the US and working with Carrie Griffin and service providers that Carrie had trained in customised employment, and was actually at one of those sessions with Carrie, and he just said to me, he said, you're going to have to go back and do this yourself. He said, because no one else is going to. And of course, when I came back to Australia, I had a chat with Trevor, and in time he said, yep, go ahead and do it, because again, no one else is going to do it. So it's not just me. There were a whole bunch of friends I had, still have, at the time, and we sort of went, well, let's do this, and we'll start it outside of the university system, primarily because we didn't want the politics of universities, and at the same time we wanted to be free to focus on the things that we felt were important. And the genesis behind that is that we often come across peer-reviewed papers, and then there was a fair number of them, and when you read them, they didn't really answer the question. If you were a support worker in employment or you were an employer, you couldn't pick them up and go, oh, that's how to do it. They were, really they required you to have another degree. So we purposely focused, even though we do research and write peer-reviewed papers, we purposely focused on translational research. In other words, writing materials and research that someone could pick up, read, and go, that's how to do it. So that's, our real emphasis, along with our training, etc., and other things. But of course, we have well-established links with researchers and institutions and service providers globally that we bounce off and share ideas with. As a matter of fact, this particular job development discussion we're going to have today is underpinned by a job development course, which we've written, and I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go along. But that material is currently sitting with Trevor in Sydney and David Mank in the US, who are reviewing it, and that will simply mean that our course and our material will continue to evolve, and that's important for us. So, the genesis of the problem. for years, people like Rich Lukey in 2004, who wrote about the fact that mostly there's not a lot of theory underpinning practice in disability employment, and that this absence of theory relegates the practice to sort of something less than what you would see in rehabilitation and other sciences or other services. So it really came down to the fact that it was up to the quality of the individual delivering the service to actually, achieve an outcome. And if they weren't particularly interested in what they were doing, the outcomes never happened. And you can see as recently as 2021, research was coming out, and it was being qualified by researchers. They'd interviewed employment staff, lots of them, employment professionals, and they were simply qualifying, saying it because of the absence of validated practices is really just observations and opinion rather than real evidence-based practices. And you can see, Paul Wayman made an observation at a workshop that David Mank ran, where he basically said that present research into disability employment practice was more about admiring the problem and not coming up with solutions. So you can see that from our perspective, it's like, well, what's really going on here? We've been delivering employment services for over 60 years in disability, certainly since 1986, with the various acts. What's going on? So what I did was, because I was in the process of writing a job development course, I thought, okay, let's have a look and see what's going on. So using the EBSCO discovery tool at the university, I was able to find 126 peer-reviewed papers using the search terms of job development, disability, job coach. As well as that, I looked at a number of peer-reviewed journals that focus simply on employment. These were the 8 or 9 journals that I personally subscribe to. And I came up with another 12 more papers that focus on job development or the job coach. And as you can imagine, you're sitting here looking at that, you're kind of going, well, hey, guess what? I've got less than 140 peer-reviewed papers that actually even talk about job development. But, I was a little bit gobsmacked, to be honest. So I spoke to David Mank and Trevor and a few other people, and Trevor observed that he kind of thought that the research into practice had pretty much stopped decades ago. David said to me that, you've got to go ahead and write this course. You've got to write the course, put it out there, and then see what happens and see if we can get some validated evidence to turn job development into an evidence-based practice. So that's a really interesting proposition from my perspective. So that research and that processes exist in the job development course that we have at our college. And I guess the thing from now is that, we'll continue to evolve what's there based on what we see from that practice. We'll go out, we'll collect the data, and hopefully in time we'll be able to see enough results and enough data to illustrate what an evidence-based practice of job development will actually look like. So it's an interesting proposition, I guess, from that perspective. So let's look at some methodologies that exist around disability employment per se. And today we have 2 common methods plus one more, which is the one you see a lot of. We have customised employment, we have individual place and support, and of course the more common methodology is called we've always done it this way. So, you've already seen that. I know that when I started in the field of disability employment and employment services per se, I wasn't given any guidance. I was given the 700-odd page standard operating procedure manual and told, can you read, understand that, and then when you've done that, can you just sign that you've understood it? And by the way, can you have it done by the end of the week? Because if you don't, well, you won't have a job. And so that was a fascinating introduction to it. So why don't we look at some of the characteristics of the employment methods, and let's explore some of those and see where that leads us to. So customised employment, if you look at it, it has 4 main themes, and that is the use of work experience, informational interviews, vocational themes, and job development per se, as it says. So work experience realistically in customized employment, the discovery process is a capacity building tool. People think that customized employment is discovery and job carving, and that's kind of how you know that they don't understand it, because it's not. If you think it's discovery and job carving, the signal you're sending to an employer is that, well, this is job carving. And job carving, we're going to carve a job because the person really doesn't have the skills to do a job like everybody else in the building. That's telling the employer that, okay, you want me to employ someone that actually can't do the work? So I have to actually now invest money and time in creating another job? It's the wrong message. Job carving is an accommodation, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. So if you think about work experience in the customized employment methodology does two things. It's done at the earlier stage, where it's about exploring the client's skills, interests and abilities, and taking them into settings where you can see if that interest really is something that they actually want to do as a job and not something they like, rather than something they actually want to do, because we all have things we like to do, but we probably don't want to do them as a job. I'm sure many people love going to restaurants and things like that, but I'm pretty certain most of you don't want to be a chef and work long hours out the back, getting yelled at, despite all your master chef fantasies. It's probably not what you want to do for a living. As a matter of fact, most of us probably cringe when someone goes, "Mum, when are we having dinner?" It's like, oh my God, I've got to cook dinner again. Informational interviews. This is one of the real strengths of customized employment, because these are when you go and see an employer, and we're not looking for a job. We just want information, simple information about the business. How do you employ people? What sort of qualifications do people have to have? I did an informational interview in Queensland not so long ago, with a staff member from an organisation we're working with. And we went and saw a cafe, and what we discovered was that, among other things, was that, they have baristas, and everybody goes, everybody's got to get a certificate in baristaing. But what we found in the restaurant was that, no, they don't employ anybody with a barista certificate. They don't want to employ anybody with a barista certificate because they want to teach them their way of doing it. And secondly, the people the bean roasters, the people they get their beans from, they all have their way of doing it. They want to train the barista staff in how to get the best out of their beans to make that perfect cup of coffee. So you can see that the idea of barista training is nice, but what we discovered is that, well, you don't. So, so maybe in that situation where you're sitting there going, hey, we'll get you some more qualifications, maybe you don't need them. And certainly from what we've discovered in that setting, you don't need them, and that's the strength of informational interviews. And I think one of the other things is that if you've got a client that has an interest in a particular type of work, just coach them a little bit with a couple of questions they can ask an employer. And when you go to do an informational interview, what you find is the person you're supporting with a disability is there, and they're asking questions of the employer. So they're having a conversation one-on-one. They're building a relationship. But do you know what else happens? The disability disappears, because this is two people having a conversation. So we don't have to do disability awareness. We don't have to convince them to employ someone with a disability, because they're standing there having a conversation. They're building a relationship. And, and it's also one of the reasons we don't use resumes, because the informational interview gets rid of that process, because we have two people that have an interest in a common thing, that particular piece of work, that kind of go, hey, do you want to come and do some work experience? And we often get work experience, and often we'll have employers say to us, look, you've got someone in mind, I've got a vacancy. If you want them to come down, they can have a trial. And it's like, okay, brilliant. And more often than not, when I'm doing it, I generally don't have anyone in mind, because I'm just out there doing informational interviews, and I guess to a degree, building an employer network of people that are open to employing anybody, let alone someone with a disability. The vocational theme process, this is this idea that we all have multiple pathways that we could go down. And Kerry Griffin came up with the idea of vocational themes because, he learned about problem solving and as he said to me often, and if you've seen the video of Kerry and I talking about customised employment, he talks about the fact that, one solution is great, two solutions problem is brilliant. If you've got three, woo, you're in business. And this is what a vocational theme does. It doesn't narrow you down to pursuing one occupation in one field. It gives you the opportunity to look a little bit further and look at other things that you may be interested in that actually could become a career or a pathway or a job. And this is where the job development phase of customised employment comes from. It builds out of the vocational themes, because it's always about a real job for real wages, not less than what everybody else gets, or potentially self-employment. So, it creates multiple pathways, and that's the real key thing of customised employment. But again, not a lot of direct, framework for job development per se. So let's look at individual place and support. Now, individual place and support today is largely used in mental health settings, and it's for you see it used for people that have mental health plans that are connected to a mental health service that are between the ages of 15 and 25, and that's lovely, but that's like 5% of the population that are unemployed that might have a mental health condition. And it's based around the idea of rapid engagement. The clients generally, they've been employed, they've got a clear understanding of where they want to go. So, they almost tell you, look, I want a job in this, and this is the place I want to work. And, it's about using resumes and sort of going to those places and looking for vacancies. It's about doing the Seek thing online and all this sort of stuff. But importantly, it's about finding flexible work conditions because of the episodic nature of mental illness. In customised employment, we're looking for someone's ideal, conditions of employment, their ideal place of employment, and we try to do that as well with IPS, and this is part of the logic behind us writing an IPS course for non-mental health settings, simply because outside of the city where all the mental health settings are, who's going to deliver employment support for someone with mental illness? It's going to be someone not in a clinical setting. So, that was part of that driver. And, give you an idea of we talk about ideal settings. Many years ago, I worked with a young man that had mental illness, severe mental illness, and he was self-medicating. And what we found over time was that the best place for him was somewhere where he could work hard, sleep, and then get a few days off. And he ended up working on a fishing trawler where he'd just work, sleep. And what he said to me at one point was that the only place he screws up is when he's on dry land. When he's actually out there working, he's going flat out, and he really loves it. So, not everybody wants to work on a fishing boat and work themselves silly for 12 hours and sleep for a few hours and that sort of stuff. But, it's that flexible workplace and what's the ideal conditions of employment for that person. So that's where we end up, in that particular case. And that's kind of what IPS is trying to do. So we end up with a third method, which is we've always done it this way, and whether that's because the system drives that particular process because, invariably they're in a hurry. It's the old resumes. For me, that's a bit of a safe haven. It involves using Seek, invariably collective applications. The job development guy comes around and kind of says, well, can I get 4 resumes from everybody, please? Because I found 10 jobs and I need 4 resumes. I take 40 or 50 resumes along of people that can do the job. The likelihood is that we'll be able to fill some of those vacancies. And even if you don't have anybody that actually wants to work there, you still have to provide you still end up providing the resumes. Hopefully it's changed since then, but my suspicion is that's still how job development is done. And sometimes, this collective application can be around things like staff having KPIs. They've got to ring X number of employers a week. Well, they've got a call centre, which for me is a fabulous one because I don't know how you understand what's in your community. If you're using a call centre, a lot of work a lot of employers just aren't visible in the communities. And certainly when you go into smaller rural areas, most businesses aren't that visible. There's a lot of businesses that aren't on the main street, and yet most little towns have a main street and not much else. So you're not going to see a lot of business opportunities. And of course, the particular methodology here involves job coaching, which is, for me, has always been a bit of an odd one, because if you're coaching someone and you actually don't know what the employer is or who the employer is, so what are you doing? You must be teaching them interview skills and generic stuff, which doesn't really have a real deep understanding of the client. And of course, we're seeing, some service providers moving towards using artificial intelligence, which as a way of job matching. And again, I'm not sure how that's going to work in terms of, if you're basing it on the information that's in front of you, how does that work? I mean, if I turn the camera from blur to, full view, what you would see behind me are all the things that are important to me, the things that mean something to me, and they would give you an idea of my interests, the sort of things that make me get out of bed and want to go somewhere. And this is why with customized employment or the discovery process, it starts in the person's home, because that's where the things that interest are. The things that they get out of bed and do. And if you can find those interests and match it to an employment opportunity, well, they're probably going to get out of bed and go there pretty excitedly every morning. So that's the three, methodologies that we commonly see. And they have a couple of common traits, which is, these are high-level activities. There's no real job development framework per se. And this absence of a job development framework, to my mind, creates opportunities for shortcuts. And I would think that, with 30 odd years of unchanged outcome rates, despite the record numbers of people in the systems, something's going wrong. So this is where we come to the idea of developing a job development framework to add some rigor to it, and also to lessen the possibility of people shortcutting it. Now, it's not going to stop people taking shortcuts. People will always take shortcuts. But if you have a framework, then it's less likely that you'll take a shortcut, because hopefully you'll follow the framework. And, from our point of view, we spend a fair bit of time thinking about this, and certainly the framework, which we'll show you, is not the first version of it. When you think about it long and hard, what's the employment process all about? I mean, who's it for? What would you base a framework on? And from my perspective, this is what it looks like. You would build it around the client, because the whole point of the employment service is about the client, understanding the client, and then understanding the employer. And then you do some job analysis and some task analysis, and maybe some job creation or carving, and then accommodation. So, this is a framework that, from my perspective, pulls back from the system and puts the client in partnership with the employer and the job developer, because it's important, and it's about relationships, mutuality. So let's have a look at those layers, starting with, the client. So understanding the client, and as I've said, this is really about focusing on their emerging skills, their interests, their abilities, and using work experience for skills development and understanding pathways and developing pathways for careers, not just a job. I think we've gone past that point where people want a job. People want more than that. And we know that people are going to have a career that involves changing jobs 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe even 13, 14 times these days, such as the nature of employment and the opportunity. And this is where you've really got to understand the client. And you can't do that sitting opposite them at a desk. You've actually got to go out in their community, go into their home, see what interests them, see what they're doing, talk to people, find out what makes this person tick, what excites them. And if you understand that, you can then start to think about employers and what's a good ecological fit for this client. I mean, where does it make sense, the environment where this person can be their best, and really succeed at it? What does that look like? And if we understand that, we start to think about employers and the right employers for the client. And this is where we have the construct of mutuality. Everybody wins. The client gets an employment opportunity and a pathway that they're excited about, and an employer gets something that makes sense for them in that they get a valued employee that is contributing to their organisation. Because, you know, with employers, yes, it's about the relationship, and you've got to build a relationship with an employer. So does your client. It's about the relationship they create. But, you know, if you're running a business, whether it's for-profit, not-for-profit, it doesn't matter what you call your business. At the end of the day, it's always about the money, because, you know, if you're not making a profit, how are you going to pay wages? You know, I think Carrie said at some point, wages are the, you know, I can't remember what he said, basically on the lines of, you know, wages are the profit of sin, I think it was what he said. But, you know, if you're not making money, you can't pay wages. And if you're an employer and you've turned up and you've kind of gone, hey, I got a resume and I got a person with a disability, why do I want to employ anybody? I mean, is this person going to make me money? You know, what's the business proposition? And this is why, from my perspective, simply going out with resumes and banging on doors, you know, you're basically saying, hey, employ this person with a disability and we'll help you because, but you haven't kind of went, well, this is the money side, and I'm not talking about, you know, wage subsidies. I'm talking about what makes sense for you as a business. You know, what's the money proposition for me? How do I make more money out of the existing processes rather than some other weird proposition you might put to me? So that's important. So how do we do that? You know, and we do that by starting with a job analysis, a really sound job analysis. And, you know, as it says there, a job analysis is a systematic study of a job that records the tasks, the interactions, the methods, how people do things. You know, it's the big picture stuff. It breaks it down into, you know, the little steps, etc., etc. And as you can see there's a job analysis form, and that job analysis form has been around for years. As a matter of fact, I think I adapted that from the Griffin-Hamus form, but certainly there's a lot of them around that look very similar to that. And if you look at it, you know, it talks about the job description, it talks about the job steps, not tasks as in discrete, but the bigger picture stuff. You know, if you're thinking about someone who's a barista, they're making coffee, but are they also taking orders? Are they also filling orders? Are they also going off and toasting a sandwich for someone? You know, are these are the things they're doing, their tasks. You know, the critical essential things, which are, you know, you'd look at it, you go, okay, that's the barista, what's the essential stuff? Making coffee, but okay, so why are they over there making toast? You know, so you put all those things down. What do you think the knowledge, abilities, skills, or even, you know, qualifications that might come to it? And linking those tasks, competencies, you know, if you know this, you can do that type things. What are the environmental factors, potentially workplace accommodations? Maybe none. You know, who's the mentor? Who's the go-to person? And a whole range of other things that you can see when you're doing this. You know, and job analysis is something we all do all of the time. Well, maybe just me, but you know, if you're standing in the queue at the supermarket and you're waiting, you're probably watching the person doing the checkout and kind of going, well, you know, if they did this quicker, or they did this, or they did this, the whole thing would be quicker. That's a job analysis from the big picture, and that's kind of what we want you to do. And go into a coffee shop, you know, and do that. Sit there, have a cup of coffee. I know when I'm in a coffee shop and I'm by myself, I'll just sit there and watch what's going on. You know, see who does what, how they're doing it, what things break up. You know, when you're sitting there going, well, I ordered my coffee 15 minutes ago, why hasn't it turned up? It's because the barista is not just making your coffee, which takes 4 minutes. Spent the other 11 minutes taking 7 other orders and putting the toast on for someone and yelling at someone in the kitchen to make this, and then, you know, giving coffee to someone who wanted that, and then someone else jumped in and said, oh, can I make an order? So you can see why job analysis is really important. And that leads us to the next stage, which is task analysis. And this is where, task analysis has different meanings for different industries. And if you do a search online, you'll see that there are a dozen different meanings. But essentially, it's breaking down tasks, complex things into chain skills, the little components that link together. And I'm sure you've probably all seen Mark Gold's Try Another Way videos, which is the systematic instruction ones, and you've seen the use of the bike hubs that Mark used to use, where the bike hub is taken apart and there's a sequence you put together. These are chained skills. When you follow them and you put them together in that sequence, you end up with a completed object, which was the bike hub. So that's the chaining of a complex set of skills into smaller ones and link them together. Some of us use T-shirts, folding T-shirts when we're teaching that sort of stuff. But that's what a task analysis is. And when you look at it, you can see from the task analysis form, you've made a note of any instructional strategies or prompts that person doing the job needed or didn't need, or you might think, okay, someone might need a prompt. You've got the sequence, whether someone made an error or not, and maybe some potential in accommodations. If you have a client in mind, you might go, well, for my client to do this, he's going to need help with this, this, and this. These are accommodations. What does that look like? Those sort of notes. So that's kind of what a task analysis looks like. And then, of course, we move to the next stage. And this is, for me, a really interesting one because, job carving creation by itself is an accommodation. It's not where we really want to start because, the whole point of what we're trying to do is find employment for someone that's exactly the same as everybody else on the same award wages as everybody else. We don't want to sort of go, well, I've got someone with a disability that would love to work here. I know they can't do everything, so why don't we create a job or carve a job out for them? As an employer, I'm sitting there going, well, hang on a second. That seems like hard work. Why do I want to do this? So if you're going to go down the pathway of using job carving, and let's be honest, I mean, if you have a client that doesn't have a full range of skills, and probably none of us had a full range of skills when we started work, you need to be able to create a business case for the employer. And you can see on the job carving form, it takes the task analysis further. So you've observed the sequence, you've determined whether what they do is productive and non-productive, and let's go back to the barista. The productive things are everything to do with making coffee. The non-productive things are the things that take away, taking orders, delivering orders, making toast. I mean, making toast isn't part of making coffee, so that's a non-productive element. The time that it takes to do all these other things that popped in while they were trying to make coffee, including the time to make the different steps for the coffee, and the cost of doing that. And the cost is not difficult to work out because, the person you're observing is probably on an award. They're probably getting $32 an hour or something like that, and the on costs mean that it's probably costing the employer $40 an hour. So it's not difficult to then take that and go, okay, $40 an hour, 60 minutes and an hour, and these are the steps, the time taken. So you can put a dollar figure on it, because then, when you go to an employer, you've got a business case. You've identified a problem, you've got the solution, and you've got the dollars and cents. And that's really important. As a business owner, the dollars and cents are super important, because why do I want to take someone on when I don't need someone? But if you've got a solution to a problem, and I probably know what the problem is, but I'm too busy to work out the solution, you've come up and said, hey, look, I've costed this out, and for X number of dollars a week, you can make 5 times more money than the cost of this. Well, I'm going to listen, because, that contributes to my bottom line. And that's, to me, is real job creation, because it provides a financial benefit in terms of a job for someone. And at the same time, as an employer, you show me how to make extra money without making a big investment. So, you know what? I'm going to listen. That's something that's really important to me. And that gets to the next thing, which is often a stumbling block, I think, for a lot of people, which is accommodations. given the various acts that exist, that have existed now for quite a number of years, everybody is entitled to reasonable accommodations in a workplace. And most people think, oh my God, accommodations, this is going to cost us a fortune. But the reality is that accommodations don't. You know, most of the research highlights that accommodations are in the order of about $300. I think more recent research I've seen in the States sort of says it's maybe closer to $500 now, but it's not a huge amount of money. And at the same time, you know, the government funds that. But accommodations are quite simple. I mean, we've all got them. I mean, a smartphone is the simplest accommodation, and we've all got them. You know, we all have phones on our desk where we make a phone call, we press speaker. We don't pick the phone up because, you know, we're probably doing something else, but we're having a conversation on a phone without holding it, just talking to it. So, you know, that's an accommodation. And many of our clients will have the accommodations worked out. They know what they need in the workplace. I mean, we've all got them. And I mean, I've got a kitchen drawer full of accommodations that help open lids and jars and things like that. So we need to sort of think a little bit differently. It's not an expensive proposition, you know. And that brings us to a discussion around the whole point of why bother? Why develop create a job development framework? And I think it's because, from my perspective, if we're going to deliver disability employment services support, and we're going to call it evidence-based practice, there needs to be some evidence. And you know, if you're going to do that, you need to have a framework. I mean, you just can't go, hey, you know, let's go and do this, and everybody goes off and they do a million different things. You can't research that. That's just nonsensical. And you know, one of the things that's prompted me to continue, you know, to write the job development course and develop the hierarchy was David Mank said to me, you know, Peter, you've got to do it. Create a program, create a framework, and let's go and collect the data from that being used and see what that tells us. Does it create the evidence for practice? I don't know yet. I think it will, but you know, or maybe it'll tell us something else. And I think that's, you know, that's how you create evidence for practice. It's not simply, hey, this is what we're going to do. Here's the evidence. Well, we got it right. You know, very rarely do we get it right first time. And, you know, and as I've said earlier on, you know, the course that I've created around job development, which exists at our college, you know, you can have a look at it there. It's going to evolve. I mean, Trevor is looking at the job development course material. David is looking at it. They will give me feedback and I will evolve it like everything else that we have on our programs. They evolve and they'll continue to evolve because that's what evidence does. Evidence means that practice evolves, but you've got to start somewhere. And I think that given that we've gone really nowhere, you know, I mean, the outcome rates in most disability employment services haven't changed, certainly not since the advent of the DES system. This is the disability, the various acts, etc., etc. Nothing's changed. So from my point of view, having a framework is a starting point to building an evidence base, and that's why it's really important. We have to start to build the evidence for practice. Otherwise, people are just going to shortcuts and people will take shortcuts and we're going to be having the same discussion in 10 or 20 years' time. Now, have a look at what's on the college in terms of material for training and that sort of stuff. That's my email address, my phone number there. By all means, ring me or email me if you've got a question. I'm happy to answer them. I'm happy to set up a Zoom or a Teams session and have a conversation with you about anything we've discussed today or any questions you might have. You're probably thinking the video is going to go a little bit longer. What we discovered was that miraculously in Zoom, it didn't record the webinar. That's why this looks a little bit different. But we did answer the questions during the live webinar, and if you do have some further questions, by all means reach out to me. Go and explore the college. At the same time, we have another webinar in July where we're going to look at transition to work and the various supports that are available and how to get the funding and actually what to do with it. You know, as I alluded to earlier on, a lot of what we should be focusing on in transition is building someone's capacity, not how to write a resume and how to use Seek, because, you know, I mean, I was at a college a few weeks back and the parents were asking me, you know, what are you going to do for my kid? And I was kind of going, well, you know, I'm not going to teach them how to write a resume. I'm not going to teach them how to use Seek. I'm not going to teach them how to use a computer, do a job search, because, you know, I spoke to each of the kids individually with their parents and I sort of asked their name and I'd just look at the kid and go, look, you know, I'll bet you're a gamer. You know, and they go, yes. You know, I bet you've got an iPad. I bet you've got a laptop. I bet you know how to use a computer like mad crazy skills. Yep. So you don't need me to teach you how to do these things, do you? And they went, nope. So, you know, putting someone in a room and teaching them how to use a computer, they could probably teach me more than I'll ever know about how to use a computer. So, you know, this is why it's important that we step back and have a framework for job development and build the person's capacity, their capacity to self-determine, their capacity to self-advocate. And you'll see that in our programs. You probably, people go, well, okay, self-advocacy and self-determination, what does that mean? Well, you know, self-determination is the capacity to make a decision, and self-advocacy is the capacity to use your voice. And you might think, okay, make decisions to have a voice, what does that do? Well, I would suggest there's probably a lot of data that says if you don't have a voice in a workplace, if you don't have a capacity to make decisions, chances are you're probably going to be bullied in the workplace. And if you have a disability, I would almost guarantee that. I mean, we'll go and look at the evidence, but I'll bet that's what it says. So I'm going to finish there. And again, I apologise for Zoom not recording it, and I think I've got pretty close to what we discussed today in the webinar, but reach out, have a chat to us. There is another webinar coming up. You'll find it on Sticky Tickets, the site we use, or if you want, send me an email and or go to our social media page, which is the CEDA Facebook page, and you'll find some references to it there, and you can just go ahead and register it. But if you like, just search under the Sticky Tickets, which is a ticketing website that we use, or that you use to come to this, of course. Just go there and you'll find under CEDA Transition to Work, and that'll hook you up for next month's webinar. So thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate your time today, and of course the slightly altered version of this webinar. So thanks, everyone.